Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back today with another installment of my Question the Narrative series, and today's video is called Volcanoes, Resets, and the Invention of Time. And I did not come up with this video idea on my own. It actually came from two people who sent me emails, which we are going to read through today and just, go diving down that rabbit hole a little bit with the information that they've given to me. And I've got to say thank you to everyone who sends me emails. I've been getting quite a bit. And sometimes it's hard for me to keep up. So if I haven't responded or if I haven't addressed it in a video, it doesn't mean that I'm completely ignoring everyone's emails. It means that I am trying to sift through them. It's been very, very busy for me this month where we finished up our homeschool year, but where I live, we have to submit all of our homeschool evaluations by June 30th. And 3 of my kids had to do standardized tests this year, which we absolutely loathe. And we finally finished that last test today. But yeah, it's just been crazy. And yeah, so I'm quite a bit behind, but let's get to the first email. It says, hello, my name is Rich. I live in England. I've been watching your uploads quite a bit lately, the question, the narrative ones, and I've been trying to figure out how to send you a private message. What makes me think and almost feel after watching your uploads is that something happened that we're not told about, which, yeah, I absolutely agree with. A cover up in history, I suppose you could say. I've looked into what happened in San Francisco in the 1850s and early 1900s. So they say, most of the city burned down first time, and 50 years later, it was again destroyed by an earthquake. Yes. And I think that I addressed that a little bit on a video. I'm not sure that I've ever done a complete video. I know that John Levi has, though. So highly recommend his channel. Anyway, many things seem to have happened in between 1776 to 1905 globally. Did you know that of the 10 most largest and deadliest volcanic eruptions known in human history, 6 of them happened in between the years I've just mentioned above? And I did not know that. And it says the largest happened in the very same year. We're told Napoleon had his war at Waterloo and lost in June 1815. And here, this is interesting. Mount Tambora is the deadliest eruption in recent human history, claiming the lives of up to 120,000 people. Okay. So on the 10th of April, 1815, Tambora erupted, sending volcanic ash 40 kilometers into the sky. It was the most powerful eruption in 500 years. Upon entering the ocean, the force of the pyroclastic flow caused the creation of a series of towering tsunamis. Thanks to the enormous amounts of SO2 emitted, the world experienced a severe temperature drop that led to global crop failures. Thousands starved to death in China, while typhus spread across Europe. And although its eruption reached a violent climax on the 10th of April, 1815, it increased steaming and small eruptions occurred during the next 3 years. The ash from the eruption column dispersed around the world and lowered global temperatures in an event sometimes known as the year without a summer. And I have heard of that. And that was in 1816. This brief period of significant climate change triggered extreme weather and harvest failures in many areas around the world. Several climate forcings coincided and interacted in a systematic manner that has not been observed after any other large volcanic eruption since the early Stone Age. A mud flood. And you know what? A lot of us, we tend to think of mud. But I do know that there are other channels that have talked about that the mud flood could actually have been the result of a volcanic eruption. I know that I've already mentioned that it could have been the result of soil liquefaction from an earthquake. There are so many different theories that we have, but it certainly does seem feasible. So the photo that I showed you in the very beginning, this is actually a city covered in volcanic ash. And as you can see, it certainly looks like what many of us have seen and call mud flood photos. We see half-buried buildings. And now this one is more recent. Most of the mud flood photos that we see, let me see if I can find one here. Most of the ones that we see have been mostly dug out. But as you can see here, this one was buried by something. We're not sure what, but we can see windows down here, possibly a door. That's not the one. Okay, here we have some cars covered. And here we have another city, again, which has clearly been more recently dug out. But again, the resemblance to what we see here is uncanny, and this really just looks like something before it was dug out. So to me, yes, I think that it's very feasible that the mud flood could have been caused by something such as a very large scale volcanic eruption. It could have even been the one that we've been reading about on Mount Tambora, I believe. Um, and I think that it's something, that is fun to think about. And I think it's something that, a lot of us need to question because we're all wondering why so many of the things that we have been looking at when it comes to missing records and buildings that are half buried, holes in the history narrative that we're told, something happened. And I think that from this email, he has a really good theory. So let's just continue because he's not done. So, can you imagine the amount of rainfall created by this around the world as the atmosphere tries to clean itself of all this debris put into it by the eruption? People seem to talk like the mud flood came from beneath. But how can it come from beneath all over the world at possibly the same time? Now, the only theory that I would have would have been the worldwide earthquake theory, which is what I talked about. And a lot of people equate that with if, for example, the 1,000-year reign did already happen and Satan would have been released in Revelation 20, that could have caused a worldwide earthquake. But could it also have been from a volcanic eruption? Absolutely, especially if it's raining down ash all over the world. And it says, perhaps it's worth looking into as this gives a new angle on what was happening around times people are talking about the mud flood. And yeah, this one happened in 1815. So I just wanted to look into another town that was buried by a volcano. Everybody goes immediately to Pompeii. And I think that one is kind of overdone just because, yeah, it's really cool and sad at the same time. But everyone talks about Pompeii. So I wanted to use something a little lesser known. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about my grammar. And I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but I'm just going to call it Chaitin, the town buried by a volcano. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but I just wanted to give you an idea, and I wanted to look at some of the photos. So early in the morning of May 2nd, 2008, a volcano located about 10 kilometers to the north of the town of Chaitin near the Gulf of Corcovado in southern Chile rumbled to life after nearly 10,000 years of inactivity. The plume of volcanic ash rose to 17 kilometers and blanketed the entire town. Now again, so this obviously was a smaller volcano than the one that we were just talking about, a smaller eruption, I should say, than what we were just talking about, but it's still going to give you a good glimpse into what happens. At that time, about 4,000 people were living there, and they were immediately evacuated. The volcano continued to erupt for the next several days, becoming increasingly violent. The ash column became 30 kilometers tall and drifted across Chile and Argentina and over the Atlantic Ocean. The town of Chaitin was not significantly hit by the eruption until heavy rainfall swept the ash and mud deposited in the crater and on the flanks of the volcano into the Chaitin River that flows right past the volcano, continuing its way south and past Chaitin until it drains into the sea. So as the Lehar, I don't know if I'm saying that right either, gradually filled the riverbed, the watercourse became shallower until May 12th when the riverbanks were breached. Since its old bed was full, the water cut a new course right through the center of the town, swallowing everything that stood on its way. Nearly half the town was destroyed. And here's a photo of that. Now, so you can imagine not only the volcanic ash raining down on the surrounding areas, but when that mixes with heavy rainfall, what is that going to look like? Well, it could very well look like a mud flood. And so here is a photo there. And that's of the plume. Here's some more damage done. And so, yeah, so what we're seeing here are more recent things that could have been not related, but could have been similar to what we're seeing of buildings that are dug out now, but we're wondering, why do they look like that? And you still have to wonder, okay, well, what is the point? Why would they hide if there was a volcanic eruption that did all that? And you know what? Sometimes I don't know. I've gone into this theory a little bit. I want to address a future video about it, but I do think that it might have to do with the fact that possibly we had more technology than what the powers that be wanted us to. It could have also been if the 1,000-year reign already happened and then ended and we're in the short season. Of course, they would want to hide the fact that the Bible is true. Um, so anyway, there are other theories that I had, and of course I can't think of them off the top of my head. But, oh, and also, um, we're constantly being pushed into believing evolution. But if you actually look at the way the world goes, evolution, things have to get better over time. Survival of the fittest, correct? But what we're seeing is entropy. Things are breaking down over time. So could it have also been something to cover that up? The fact that we are far less advanced than the people before us were. So I don't know. Anyway, but we're not even done with this email. Then he continues. Oh, wait, actually, no. I'm like losing my train of thought here. We'll just continue with this. Have you ever thought, and this is the same email, have you ever thought that time could be stopped, halted? When the clock turns from 11:59 p.m. to 12 o'clock a.m. and you get a new day, sometimes when this happens, you get a new year. Well, what if they decided the new year doesn't tick over to the next until they cleaned up? And the reset, as we talk about, was brought into being. 50 years or so could have gone by until they decided it was time to start the new year calendar again. They get back on their feet, they dig out the train tracks, the buildings, everything. They are found, not founded. So that, I'm going to be honest, I've never thought of that before. But could it possibly be true? Absolutely. We have talked about the fact that there's possibly around 1,000-year discrepancy in our history where some people believe that 1,000 years was actually inserted into our timeline. And so a lot of times people will ask, but how could they possibly do that? How could they insert something like that into our timeline without us being aware of it? But let's continue reading what he wrote. Our modern timekeeping regime was born at the end of the 19th century. So how was it that everyone around the world knew what the time was or even what year it was at any particular time in history? The fact is they couldn't have because they had no way of knowing. And then we would just see brainwashing, you could say. The fact these countries were leveled, destroyed, and their histories vaporized was a byproduct of their wars. They're still going on today. I do not think their reset ended. And I skipped this, but I'm actually going to go back to it. The British may have possibly done this in China by rewriting their chronological history. The British ruled the world in between 1776 and 1905. And the wars, in his opinion, wasn't to destroy countries and win, but to change societies. And that is something that I think that a lot of us have thought about. But this really made me want to look into the history of time. And so I actually found this, a brief history of modern time. I will leave all of these links in the description box. I'm definitely not going to read through all of this because this is a pretty long article. In January 1906, several thousand cotton mill workers rioted on the outskirts of Bombay. Refusing to work at their looms, they pelted factories with rocks, their revolt soon spreading to the heart of the city, where more than 15,000 citizens signed petitions and marched angrily in the streets. They were protesting the proposed abolition of local time in favor of Indian Standard Time to be set 5.5 years ahead of Greenwich. To early 20th century Indians, this looked like yet another attempt to crush local tradition and cement Britannia's rule. So there's one example. And we have right here in the US, we've got daylight savings time. So they have already messed with our time here as well. And a lot of people do not like that. With me, honestly, it doesn't matter one way or the other. I know that a lot of people don't like the extra daylight or the loss of daylight hours at certain times of the year. I honestly don't notice much of a difference, but I know that people talk about it. And it's something that I never thought about much before. But now it's just another example of how, yeah, they can manipulate time. Now, no matter how small that might be. And let's look at some more examples of that. Today, we take our global system of timekeeping largely for granted. 24 time zones, rippling serenely outward from Greenwich, a year of 12 months divided into 52 weeks, recognized from San Francisco to Shanghai. the much loathed biannual leap of daylight saving time. These are the conventions that let us talk and travel and trade across the world without batting an eye. Yet, author Vanessa Ogle reminds us that standardization and simultaneity had to be invented. Our modern timekeeping regime was born at the end of the 19th century. So the way that we keep time today was born at the end of the 19th century. It was a global age like our own, linked across borders and continents and oceans. It was also a moment of great technological progress. Railways, steamships, subways, telephones, and radio thundered into existence all at once, collapsing distance and compressing time in ways that dazzled and disoriented. And again, that doesn't seem like a big deal if you're thinking about them inventing time when it comes to the time zones and when you are looking at the hours in each day. But again, what I am going to say is that if they are able to manipulate time pretty much at their whim, how often have they done this and to what extent? There are actually some really interesting examples of this that they talk about in here. Let me just go right here. For 11 years, the Soviet Union had no weekends. The experiment of a continuous week was shift work on a colossal scale, and it failed. So basically, in 1929, Joseph Stalin decided that he was just going to get rid of weekends because he didn't want people to have those 2 days off of work. So for the urban workforce of the Soviet Union, September 29th, 1929 was a Sunday like any other, a day of rest after 6 days of labor. But in the eyes of the Soviet government led by Joseph Stalin, Sundays represented a genuine threat to the whir and hum of industrial progress. For 1 day in 7, after all, machines sat silent, so he didn't want them to have a day off. So on the following Sunday, no such collective pause for breath took place. 80% of the workforce were told to go to work, 20% to stay home. The ordinary 7-day week now had a new bedfellow. I'm not going to try to say this in Russian, but continuous working week. It was 5 days long, with days of rest staggered across the week. Now the Soviet economist and politician Yuri Larin proposed the machines need never be idle. It was supposed to revolutionize the concept of labor, set a match to productivity, and make religious worship too troublesome to be worth the effort. But it failed on virtually every account. Adjustments were made, and in 1931, the cycle was extended to last 6 days. After 11 years of trial and error, the project was axed in June 1940. So we've gone beyond just like gaining an hour or losing an hour, and now we've gotten to the point with just changing, like getting rid of the weekend in general. And so as you can see, there are different extents that they go to. So from going, again, losing an hour to having no weekends. Now let's also go to the early Roman calendar. The Romans borrowed parts of their earliest known calendar from the Greeks, and the calendar consisted of 10 months in a year of 304 days. The Romans seem to have ignored the remaining 61 days, which fell in the middle of winter. So we have another calendar here that is used where 61 days are completely ignored. And so just looking at the discrepancies with all of these timekeeping methods, and again, the way that they can be manipulated, the way that they can be changed, you have to wonder, all of those dates that they made us memorize in history class, how do we know that they could possibly be true? They might have been calling them those dates, but how do we know that they were when they said they were? It's mind-blowing to think about that. But, that's why a lot of people ask questions about how do we know that the flood was not more recent? How do we know that the mud flood didn't just happen in a more recent time or in a longer time? And unfortunately, we're just at a point in time where we have been, the powers that be have demonstrated to us that they can't be trusted. And so it's been up to us to do this sort of investigating, which if I'm not coming to any conclusions today. And that's why it's told to question the narrative. I'm never here to tell anyone what to think. I just think that it's really neat to look into this stuff because we're not going to be told about it, that's for sure. And now right here, I found this. This is the 13 months calendar, and this one is as recent as 1934. And it was proposed by, let me see who it was proposed by. Was it Kodak? I believe I read somewhere that it was proposed by Kodak. I don't remember, or maybe that's just the picture. The League of Nations. Okay. So the 13 months calendar proposed to be perpetual and universal from 1934. The League of Nations has decided to invite all nations to simplify the calendar by international conference during October 1931. And here we have an advertisement for that. So again, we've got another example of people wanting to mess with the calendar. And how can you keep a proper linear account of time if people are constantly switching the hours, switching the months, taking days away? And I actually got another email by someone else, and it was only about a month after I got this one here. And let's just read through this, because this one was also, it relates to it and something else that I never knew. So, was recently poking around and found that there are some who believe that there should be 13 months in a year. 13 months with 28 days each, with an annual feast day celebrating the resurrection on April 1st, which the Satanists have renamed April Fool's Day. Anyway, very interesting and makes sense. I always wondered why my menstrual periods march backwards through the months. One month starting on the 15th, next month starting on the 12th. Our bodies are tuned to a 28-day month. And I was talking to my daughter, and, it's just, I keep saying interesting, but I can't, it's fascinating. There we go. I need to have a thesaurus next to me. But it's fascinating to think about the fact that, yeah, a woman's cycle is linked to a 28-day month, and as is the lunar cycle is a 28-day cycle. And to me, that is just evidence of order, evidence of a creator, that it could be happening in that, and not something that was created from chaos. But anyway, also always wondered why October was the 10th month, not the 8th. Never thought about that, but it's true. Octopus, 8 arms. Octomom, remember her? She had 8 kids. Well, 8 kids at once. So anyway, I didn't know, but there was supposed to be, at one point, another month in there. So according to what I've read, the yearly calendar should begin in April, which makes sense because the Bible clearly states that Passover was to be celebrated in the first month, not the fourth. And the calendar would look like this: April, May, June, July, August, sextilis, which if you see the prefix SEX, that means 6, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. And yeah, that does make more sense, because I'm pretty sure the prefix sept means 7. Also, oct means 8 and sex means 6. Some of the reading I've done places the extra month between June and July and calls it Sol. Not sure which is right, but sextilis made more sense to me. So evidently there is also a 13th nearly forgotten constellation. And I actually looked that up and I found that. So here we go. Meet Ophiuchus, the 13th sign. Meet Ophiuchus, the so-called 13th constellation in the zodiac. And yeah, not 12 constellations like the 12 months, but there are 13. And so it has to make you wonder, what happened to the 13th month? I don't know. Again, more manipulation of time. And you might be wondering why I find this so fascinating. And again, it's just because we hinge so much of what we know on dates, on timelines, on when certain things happen. And a lot of times we will write things off that as being impossible because they were too far away, or they happened, too recently. And we put so much stock into that, into the whens of events. What happens if we're completely wrong about that? And, I can't help but think about the book 1984 with, the memory hole. And they just kind of shove things down the memory hole, and the people just will believe whatever Big Brother tells them. And unfortunately, we're in a point in history where that is happening now, where a lot of people just completely forget really recent events just if they are manipulated to do so. One of the things that I was recently talking about was, if you remember, in the beginning of 2020, when everything happened, we were seeing videos all the time from over in China of people just, dropping, collapsing in the middle of the street over the C word, and blood coming out of their mouths. Really horrible stuff. And I remember saying to my husband, that looks like a B-rated movie. But people were freaking out over this. And yet now, 2 years later, people have completely forgotten that they were ever shown what was blatantly propaganda. So it's really not too hard to rewrite things like that. And I think that it says a lot, unfortunately, about the point that humanity is at, and, how manipulated we are. But, when you're manipulated over and over and over again, you don't even know what to believe anymore. It really is exhausting trying to figure things out. But for some of us, we kind of have fun doing it. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.